I am created from the finest silk, the most beautiful pearls, the most sophisticated handiwork, all designed, cut and stitched together with pure love. I have emerged from my maker's blissful imaginings. I exist to fulfill my maker's dream. And oh that I could grace my maker's body, pedestal her face, her hair and her smile, and be the embodiment of her vision of perfection, to take her to her groom. But alas, it is never to be. My maker never walked down the aisle. On a Thursday, before some final beading work was to be finished around the waist, she went out, left her workroom, her house, shut the door behind her. She did not return. In the days and weeks that followed, there was human activity in spats elsewhere in the house. From my position in the workroom, I heard them padding about, opening and closing doors, rifling through stuff, even using the bathroom. I heard the hushed voices in the hallway. Such a terrible thing. At least there weren't children. So awful for him. Once the door opened, and with a yelp was shut again as decisively as if the very air were diseased. It remained so. I came to understand that I signified the very deepest tragedy of the tragedy. A loss that no one could square up to. My unworn beauty, the most painful signifier for a life that will never be lived. In time, the door did eventually open again. A young man entered, and being directed by someone hiding in the shadow of the door, slotted me, with expertise, into a bag, zipped me in, and then transported me through the door to elsewhere. My first trip in my existence to elsewhere in the dark of a bag. I thought about my maker's final trip. After some time being carried, laid out, transported, picked up and carried again, I found myself in a new home. I was hung up on a rail with other items of clothing, in a room full of rails, crammed with items of every hue, cut, size and utility. The room was as different to that of my birthing as a sweet shop is from a library. But I took well to the hubbub and activity, the laughter and the joy. For a time I was unworn, but not ignored, not uncared for, and not alone. I was taken down a few times. I was examined, several people pawing at me. I loved it, proud of every stitch and pearl, knowing that my maker was being remembered in her exquisite work. Each time I was covered in cellophane and returned to my station. Some months later, I was taken down, released from my plastic fortress, and to my astonishment, unbuttoned. As excited as one of my constitution can be, I was donned onto the body of a delightful woman, a woman with laughter and character who could make everybody smile by just walking into a room. People loved her, and not only did some of this love naturally spill onto me, but she delighted to have me next to her skin, looked forward to our conjoining. Compared to my maker, the good lady was on the other side of age, but she so appreciated the delicacy of my substance, the care with which I had been created. She wore me and was transformed. And she wore me not just the once, but almost every night for literally months. And there I was, my story morphed into another's tragic tale, true, but still, the meaning of my existence intact, being on stage, admired for each performance for a long season of great expectations. In fact, I like to think it was my arrival at the theatre that prompted them to stage that play. But all good things, I suppose. The end came with no warning, no change in the usual activity. The fallouts and disagreements over the theatre's closure must have happened elsewhere. Overnight, my living mannequin, gone. A group of angry but sad people, some of whom I recognised from my journey to the stage and back, came into the room, divided us all up into separate bags. And I have to say, a few of the other finer items were carefully put to one side and then later removed from the room. Our fellow costumes had all been bungled into large black plastic bags and were being hauled away to an uncertain fate. I was carried, laid out, transported, picked up and carried, and then left unzipped, hanging up in a place together with the other refugees. It was a perpetually dark place. In the early days, several times, the room was entered by persons unknown to take away one of my comrades and then return with her some weeks later. That was it. Mostly there were sounds of a couple of people, both women, and about 4 cats, I think, in the house below, shuffling about, calling to each other or a cat. They were quieter folk with gentle ways, an unchanging daily routine and early nights. There were distinctly hotter periods of time and distinctly colder, but I was protected well. The rain was my favourite time, banging all about me in a furious row. The periods of heat, my least favourite. And then the soft sounds of activity in the house ceased. I was suddenly aware that the house beneath us was silent. After a few months, there were a flurry of periods of activity. There was much banging and scraping going on, and people, lots of people, many more than had been there all the years that I had been there, certainly, in and out. Eventually in quieter 2s or 3s. I could trace their movement through the house, in through the front door, in and out of every room downstairs, up the stairs, in and out of every room upstairs, down the stairs and out through the front door. No one ventured into our room. Then a period of a couple of months of silence before the house was inhabited again. It was a single person. I knew because I could trace their movement around the house in a solitary line. It was soothing, the inhabitants' routine downstairs. I knew morning, get up, scuffle about, front door slams. Late afternoon, front door slams. Evening, telly or music on, food being prepared, eaten, and then rest in the living room. A night, shower, and change. I knew weekdays and weekends. For example, the dishwasher went on Monday evenings, the Hoover banged its way around the entire house in a wiggly line on Thursday evenings, and Saturdays were lie-ins. The differing routines gave me a sense of the passing of time. And then a second human, always the same one I reckon, began to spend time in the house, eventually staying over for evenings and leaving a good half an hour in the morning before my owner. But everything changed. There was laughter. There were chases up and down the stairs, in and out of rooms. There was music blaring, there was talking and more laughter. There was a sense of harmony and happiness, even when they weren't there. The air seemed lighter and more vibrant somehow. And yes, I sensed this from the darkness of my upper vestibule. Then, one evening, they were both settled. I took it in the living room. They'd eaten something that hadn't taken long to prepare. And with no warning, the door to our room opened and someone popped their head in. Our owner, it was a man. He fumbled to find the light switch and suddenly there was light. How long had it been? Oh, years, I'm sure. The man levered himself up into the room and stood precariously balanced on the rafters. He shuffled along, looking askance at boxes, touching them and rubbing his hands together. I thought he would give up before he reached us. But he had tenacity, our owner. He stepped carefully in our direction. His hands flipped through my various comrades. I could tell he had found jewels. And then his hand came to me. He pulled me out, as he had my comrades, and dropped me back into place. I fought disappointment. Had he not looked long enough to see me for what I truly am? He turned and bent down to lean on a box as he worked his way around it, and stopped. He stopped and seemed to be thinking. I could hear his breathing. Did it start to quicken? He turned back to me and reached out to unhook me from the rail. Holding me in both arms, he staggered without much grace from rafter to rafter until he got to the entrance, a square hole in the floor, with, thank my maker, a ladder slipping down to the hallway below. My owner placed me over his shoulder as carefully as he could, I thought, and hastened down the steps. There, he placed me on the carpet floor and released me from my cellophane home. I could feel my maker's dreams emanate from my folds, my cut, my stitching. My owner ran his fingers down my length. He picked me up like a precious child and held me over two arms. He walked down the stairs and, using his hip, bumped a door open. There inside, a fire glowing inside a tiled fireplace. A painting of the sea, a coffee table strewn with books, a television with a blank screen, a dusty red sofa with a woman sat thereon, holding a glass of red liquid and reading a book. My owner waited for her to look up, waited for her to take me in, held between his arms. She went to say something, and then closed her mouth again. My owner still said nothing. Her hand flew to her mouth. In surprise, a tear slipped from her eye. Carefully, mindful of the delicacy of my substance, my owner went down on one knee. My opulence cascading down on either side of him, spilling out onto the rug. pearls catching the firelight. "Marry me," he said.